Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are opening up Chapter 24 of Lippincott's Microbiology, titled Non-Enveloped DNA Viruses.
Right.
Now, I have to be honest with you. When I first saw that title, I had a momentary flashback to cramming for exams. It sounds incredibly dry, doesn't it?
It definitely sounds like a mouthful. Non-enveloped DNA viruses. It doesn't exactly scream page-turner.
But then I started digging into the source material, and I realized something. This isn't just abstract science.
Not at all.
This chapter basically describes the entire spectrum of the human experience with infectious disease. I mean, we're talking about everything from the annoyance of a common wart or catching pink eye at a public pool, all the way to some of the most devastating conditions in medicine, aggressive cancers, and, fatal brain infections.
That is the perfect way to frame it. These viruses are ubiquitous. They're everywhere. And what makes this deep dive so interesting is the paradox.
The paradox.
Structurally, these are some of the simplest organisms we study. They're minimalists. Yet, the havoc they wreak is incredibly complex and varies wildly from one family to the next.
So let's set our mission for this deep dive. We aren't just going to memorize a list of bugs. We want to figure out the survival strategy.
Exactly.
We need to understand how these naked viruses, which are structurally so simple, manage to be so incredibly resilient and persistent in the human population.
Exactly. And the key word you just used is naked.
Right. Let's unpack that first. When the text says non-enveloped or naked, that refers to the viral structure. They lack a lipid envelope, right?
Correct. Many viruses, like the flu or HIV, wrap themselves in a lipid membrane they steal from the host cell. That membrane is delicate. It dries out, it degrades with soap or acid.
Okay.
But the viruses in Chapter 24 don't have that. They're just a genome protected by a tough, rigid protein shell called a capsid.
Which means they are the tanks of the viral world.
In a way, yes, because they don't have that delicate envelope, they're incredibly resistant to environmental stress. They don't dry out easily.
So they can survive on surfaces.
On doorknobs, on gym floors, they can even survive the high acidity of the stomach.
Which explains a lot about how they transmit, which we'll definitely get to. So the scope for today involves three main families outlined in the chapter. We have the Papovaviridae, which is a bit of an older term that splits into the Papillomaviruses and Polyomaviruses.
Right.
Then we have the Adenoviridae, and finally the tiny Parvoviridae.
That's the roadmap: papilloma, polyoma, adeno, and parvo.
So let's start with the heavyweight champion of human pathology in this group, Papillomaviridae, or HPV.
Human papillomavirus. Structure-wise, we're looking at a small, non-enveloped virus with circular, double-stranded DNA inside an icosahedral capsid.
Okay.
But if you remember nothing else about HPV structure, remember its tissue specificity.
They are incredibly picky about where they live.
Extremely. They strictly infect surface epithelia, that means skin, and mucous membranes. They don't drift through the blood to attack the liver or the heart.
They stay on the surface.
They stay right on the surface. And the way they cause disease is inextricably linked to how our skin grows.
Looking at figure 24.2 in the text, which diagrams the formation of a wart, it's a fascinating process. It seems like the virus is hacking the skin's operating system.
That is a great analogy. So picture your skin. You have the dead layer on top, but the factory when new cells are born is at the very bottom, the basal layer.
Right.
HPV infection usually starts with a microabrasion, a tiny cut that lets the virus slip past the defenses and reach those basal cells.
But it infects the baby skin cells at the bottom.
Yes. Now, normally a basal cell divides and its daughter cells move upward, differentiate, and eventually they stop dividing.
They die and slough off. That's the normal life cycle.
Exactly. But HPV changes the program. As those infected cells move up, the virus needs them to keep dividing so it can replicate its own DNA.
Because the virus doesn't have its own machinery to do it.
Precisely. This is the crucial concept. The virus is a parasite of the cell's replication machinery. It needs the cell to be in S phase, the synthesis phase, to use the host's DNA polymerase.
But those cells are supposed to be shutting down.
They are.
Yeah.
So the virus produces early proteins. Specifically, E6 and E7 are the famous one that, well, they cut the brakes.
The brakes being those tumor suppressor proteins we hear so much about.
P53 and PRB, retinoblastoma protein. Think of PRB as the brake pedal that stops the cell cycle, and P53 as the security guard that spots damage and shuts things down.
Okay.
The viral proteins bind to these suppressors and inactivate them.
So it cuts the brake lines and ties up the security guard.
And the result is that the cell keeps dividing when it shouldn't. It thickens, it piles up. That pile of cells is what we visually recognize as a wart or a papilloma.
That makes perfect sense. The wart isn't just a sore, it's a pile of cells that have been tricked into immortality for the sake of the virus.
And eventually, those cells reach the surface, die, and release thousands of new viral particles ready to infect the next person who touches that gym floor or shakes that hand.
Now, cutting the brakes on cell division sounds, well, dangerous. And the text makes a huge distinction here regarding cancer.
This is the most critical clinical correlation in the chapter. While all HPVs manipulate the cell cycle to some degree to make warts, the high-risk types do it much more aggressively.
How so?
In these cases, the viral genome can actually integrate, meaning it pastes itself into the host's human DNA. That genomic instability is the root cause of cervical carcinoma and other cancers.
Let's break down the clinical lineup because the text sorts them by numbers. It feels a bit like a lottery, but the numbers really matter.
They absolutely do. We categorize them by location and risk. First, you have the cutaneous warts. These are mostly caused by HPV types 1 through 4.
These are the standard nuisances. Common warts on fingers, plantar warts on the soles of the feet.
Right. Benign but annoying. The text also mentions a rare condition called epidermodysplasia verruciformis. It's a mouthful.
Yeah, it is.
But it's essentially a genetic inability to fight off these cutaneous types. These patients get covered in warts, and because their immune surveillance is poor, those warts can turn into squamous cell carcinomas.
Especially in sunlight.
Exactly. It's a grim reminder that our immune system is constantly keeping these things in check.
Then we move to the mucosal or genital infections. This is where we split them into low risk and high risk.
The low-risk stars are types 6 and 11.
And when we say low risk, we mean low risk for cancer, not low risk for disease.
Correct. Type 6 and 11 cause 90% of genital warts, clinically known as condyloma acuminata.
Okay.
They can also cause laryngeal papillomas, benign tumors in the airway. They look horrifying, like little cauliflowers, but they rarely become malignant.
Contrast that with the high-risk types, 16 and 18.
These are the killers. Types 16 and 18 are associated with at least 70% of all cervical cancers. And it's important to note they are also linked to anal, penile, and oropharyngeal cancer.
Cancers of the throat and mouth.
Yeah.
Diagnostically, the text points out a limitation. You can't just swab a wart and grow it in a petri dish, can you?
No, HPV cannot be cultured in standard tissue culture. For visible warts, diagnosis is clinical, you look at it.
Sure.
But for the high-risk types, specifically for cervical screening, we rely on molecular methods. We use DNA amplification, like PCR, to detect the specific genetic signature of types 16 and 18.
Which brings us to treatment and prevention. Treating warts seems frustratingly primitive. Freezing, burning, cutting.
It is. Cryotherapy, lasers, salicylic acid. But the text notes a recurrence rate of about 50%.
That's incredibly high. Why?
Because you're treating the symptom, the wart, but the virus is often latent in the visibly normal tissue surrounding it. You remove the mountain, but the tectonic plates underneath are still shifting.
Which is why the vaccine is such a game changer.
Absolutely. The text details Gardasil, which is a recombinant vaccine. It uses virus-like particles, empty shells that look like the virus but have no DNA inside. The original version covered types 6, 11, 16, and 18, so you get protection against the warts and the cancer.
The two big ones. And now we have Gardasil 9.
Which adds 5 more high-risk types to the mix. The key takeaway from the text is the expansion of who gets it. Originally, it was marketed for young females to prevent cervical cancer.
But now it's for males, too.
Now, it is a standard recommendation for males as well.
To prevent genital warts, sure, but also for herd immunity.
Exactly. By vaccinating males, you cut the chain of transmission. You protect them from penile and anal cancers, yes, but you also stop them from being carriers who infect partners.
Okay, that's the papilloma side. Now let's slide over to their cousins, the Polyomaviridae.
The Polyomaviruses. The name literally means many tumors, which is what they do in lab animals.
Not so much in people.
In humans, the story is quite different. It's less about growing tumors and more about silent, lifelong loitering.
The text focuses on two main players here, BK virus and JC virus. And in the hospital, you often hear that mnemonic. BK stands for bad kidney, and JC stands for junkie cerebral.
It's a crude mnemonic, but honestly, it maps perfectly to the pathology. Let's start with the epidemiology. These viruses are incredibly common.
Yeah, the text says 70 to 80% of adults have antibodies.
Right. Most of us catch them via the respiratory route in childhood and never even know it.
So they enter, and then what? They just hide.
They go latent in the kidneys, They sit in the tubular epithelium and just wait. In a healthy person with a competent immune system, they are harmless.
But the trouble starts when the immune system crashes.
Precisely. In AIDS patients or transplant recipients.
Let's talk about JC virus first. Junkie cerebrum. This is the one that leads to PML.
Right. When the immune system fails, JCV wakes up. It travels from the kidney to the CNS. It has a specific affinity for oligodendrocytes.
Those are the cells that create the myelin sheath, the insulation on our nerve wiring.
Exactly. The virus infects and kills them, causing demyelination. This results in progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy, or PML.
And figure 24.6 shows the MRI. You can see the lesions in the white matter.
It is a devastating, rapidly progressive disease. Loss of speech, vision, coordination, paralysis, and usually death within months.
And there's no real treatment for it?
Pretty much. There is no antiviral drug for this. You have to try to reverse the immunosuppression if you even can.
Then there is BK virus. Bad kidney.
This one is the nightmare of the transplant ward. A patient gets a kidney transplant, they're on heavy immunosuppressants.
And the latent virus wakes up.
It wakes up. It causes hemorrhagic cystitis, severe inflammation and bleeding of the bladder, or it can attack the kidney graft itself.
And briefly, the text mentions a third one, Merkel cell polyomavirus.
Yes, MCV. Discovered more recently, this is the only one in the human polyoma family that actually lives up to the name and causes cancer. Merkel cell carcinoma, a rare but aggressive skin cancer.
Okay, let's switch gears. We've done the integrators and the hiders. Now let's look at the family I was thinking of as the smash and grab artists.
The Adenoviridae.
The adenoviruses. If you look at figure 24.8, the structure is unmistakable.
It really is.
It looks like a satellite. It's an icosahedron, but it has these long spikes sticking out of the corners.
Those are the fibers, and at the tip of each fiber is a knob. It looks like an antenna array. Those knobs are crucial because they act like grappling hooks.
They bind to the host cell.
To initiate infection, yeah.
I dub this the Swiss Army knife of viruses because when you look at the clinical syndromes in figure 24.9, it seems to do a bit of everything.
It really is a generalist. Unlike HPV, which is stuck on the skin, or parvo, which needs blood cells, adenovirus can infect the mucosal epithelium of the respiratory tract, the GI tract, the eyes, and the bladder.
And its strategy is different.
It's largely elytic.
Meaning it bursts the cells.
Yes. It infects, replicates, and destroys the cell, and that leads to inflammation.
Let's run through the greatest hits of adenovirus symptoms.
First and foremost, respiratory. It causes acute febrile pharyngitis. Fever, sore throat, cough. It really mimics strep throat.
But it's not just a cold.
No. In infants, it can progress to viral pneumonia, which the text notes can have a 10% mortality rate. It's serious for babies.
Then there's the eyes. Swimming pool conjunctivitis.
Pharyngoconjunctivitis. Or the more severe epidemic keratoconjunctivitis. This is highly contagious. The text explicitly warns about shared towels or unsterilized medical instruments.
Because the virus is naked, it survives on that towel in the locker room.
For a long time.
And the gut.
Gastrointestinal, specifically serotypes 40 and 41. They are a major cause of viral gastroenteritis diarrhea in young children.
Because it survives the stomach acid.
It's a tank. It just powers through to infect the intestines.
There is also a very specific mention of a vaccine here, but I can't just go to the pharmacy and get it.
No, you can't. There is a live oral vaccine for adenovirus types 4 and 7, but it is used exclusively for the military.
Why just the military?
Because of acute respiratory disease in recruits. Think about boot camp. Extreme fatigue, high stress, crowding.
That's a petri dish.
It's a perfect storm for adenovirus transmission. Without the vaccine, outbreaks can cripple a training battalion. So they get the pill, the rest of us just have to wash our hands.
All right, we have one family left to cover. The outlier. Papovaviridae.
The parvoviruses. Parvo means small. This is the smallest DNA virus we deal with.
But size isn't the only unique thing.
No, the text highlights a major structural difference here. Every other DNA virus we've discussed is double-stranded.
Like our own DNA.
Right. Parvovirus is single-stranded.
That sounds fragile.
It is genetically limited. Because it has such a tiny genome and only one strand, it doesn't carry any baggage. It doesn't have the code to make enzymes to kickstart the cell cycle like HPV does.
So HPV forces the cell to divide. What does Parvo do?
Parvo can't force anything. It has to wait. It is entirely dependent on cells that are already in the process of dividing.
Okay.
It needs the cell to be in mitosis so it can borrow the host's cellular machinery to turn its single strand into a double strand.
So it has to find the busiest factories in the human body. Where does it go?
The bone marrow. Specifically, the erythroid progenitor cells. These are the cells that are furiously dividing to create new red blood cells. Parvovirus B19, the main human pathogen, targets these cells.
And this target, the red blood cell factory, explains the clinical disease. Let's talk about fifth disease in kids.
Erythema infectiosum. This is the classic slap cheek rash. A kid has a mild fever and then suddenly looks like they've been slapped across the face.
But the text reveals a fascinating paradox here.
It's a bit of a medical detective story, yeah. The rash isn't caused by the virus attacking the skin?
No.
No. By the time the rash appears, the virus is effectively gone from the blood. The child is usually no longer contagious.
So what is the rash?
It's the aftermath of the war. It is caused by immune complexes.
Yeah.
Your body makes antibodies to fight the virus. These antibodies bind to leftover viral pieces, and these clumps get stuck in the tiny capillaries of the skin.
So the rash is your own immune system cleaning up the mess?
Yeah.
That is a critical distinction. Rash equals recovery, essentially. But because the virus targets the bone marrow, there are situations where this is much more dangerous.
Right. If you are a healthy kid, your bone marrow stops making red blood cells for a week, and you don't even notice.
You have reserve.
Plenty of backup red blood cells floating around. But what if you are a patient with sickle cell disease?
Their red blood cells only last a few days. They rely on that factory running 24/7.
Exactly. If Parvo B19 shuts down the factory for a week in a sickle cell patient, their hemoglobin crashes. It causes a transient aplastic crisis.
Severe, life-threatening anemia.
They often need blood transfusions to survive.
And there is a similar risk for pregnant women.
Yes, hydrops fetalis. If a woman gets infected during pregnancy, the virus can cross the placenta. It attacks the fetus's red blood cell factories. The fetus becomes incredibly anemic, the heart fails.
And fluid builds up. It can be fatal.
It can be.
It's amazing how the same virus can cause a harmless rash in one person and a fatal crisis in another, purely based on the status of their blood cells.
That's the nuance of microbiology. The bug is the same. The host determines the disease.
So we've covered the four families. Let's bring this all together for a final recap.
Let's do it.
HPV, Papillomaviridae. It's a surface infection. Causes warts by cutting the brakes. PRB and P53 on cell division.
Types 1 through 4 are skin warts. 6 and 11, genital warts. And the big ones, 16 and 18, high risk for cervical cancer.
Then Polyomaviridae, the silent squatters, latent in the kidneys.
JC virus goes to the brain in the immunocompromised to cause PML. BK virus stays in the urinary tract to cause hemorrhagic cystitis in transplant patients.
Adenoviridae, the satellite with the fibers and knobs. It's the naked tank that survives the gut and environment.
And it causes that Swiss Army knife of symptoms: respiratory, ocular, pink eye, and GI diarrhea.
And finally, Parvoviridae, B19, this single-stranded outlier. It targets dividing erythroid cells in the marrow.
Causes slapped cheek via immune complexes after the virus is gone, and a plastic crisis in those who can't afford a pause in blood production.
You know, when we started, these just seemed like random viruses. But there is a theme here.
There is. It's about efficiency. These viruses are simple, only in structure. They have tiny genomes. They don't have fancy envelopes.
But they're smart.
Because they are small, they have evolved brilliant, distinct strategies to survive. HPV hijacks the cell cycle. Polyoma waits for a moment of weakness. Adeno builds a tank. Parvo surfs the wave of your own bone marrow production.
They are minimalists, but they are masters of persistence.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, that wraps up our analysis of Chapter 24. A huge thank you to everyone listening. We hope this deep dive helps turn those dry textbook facts into something that actually sticks.
Keep questioning and keep learning.
This has been The Deep Dive. Thanks for listening.